One of the common themes that arises in the conversations we're having here on the Brand a Fan show is that brands must demonstrate their core values and tell more stories in the world so that consumers identify with them, creating connections that eventually develop into fandom. But if you haven't noticed, the internet is a noisy place. There are over 3 million active podcasts just like this one. And there are something like 28 million new podcast episodes released every year. So if you have a good idea, how can you be sure someone else is going to hear it? Well, this is always the topic of conversation that I have when I get together with my pal, Tamsen Webster, including a dinner last fall with some Stranger Things themed cocktails in Indianapolis. So I've invited Tamsen to join us on the Brand a Fan show today. She is part strategist, part storyteller, and part English to English translator. Tamsen Webster helps experts drive action with their ideas through their red thread. And that's the universal tie between how people see the world and what they do in it. And Tamsen uses that proprietary red thread method to help audiences, organizations, and individuals build and tell the story of their big ideas. And Tamsen, what happens when someone tells their big idea?
What happens? Oh,
Yeah.
man. Well, ideally, it changes the world, even if it's just one person's world. But that's why I love ideas, is because they have that power. No matter the scale, they have that power of making a huge impact in some big or small way.
I love that. Welcome to the Brand a Fan show. I'm so excited you're here.
Delighted to be here. You're so one of my favorite people, and I love your fandom of fandom, which is fabulous.
It is. It is a fandom of fandom. And I will tell you, because I did finally admit this to you, I think over dinner the last time we were together, that I fangirled hard for you the very first time I saw you speak on stage. And I'm now like, I don't care who knows. I'm not afraid to admit it. I remember we were in Fort Lauderdale for Heroic Public Speaking's live event. And it was the first time that I had been really pulled into a speaking arena in the way of like learning and coaching and kind of soaking that up. And I went like full blown into speaking, like hard fandom of that. But part of that was because I saw you and colleagues like you on stage. And I was just like, I have to get to know her because she was like the smartest one up there. It made me laugh. I think you did something about crayons on stage.
M&Ms. I was talking about M&Ms. Yes.
And colors. Yes. And so, but over the past 5 years, we've become actual, real, honest to goodness friends. And I've gotten to see you on many stages. I obviously follow and love your work on LinkedIn and the notes that you post. And then your book, Find Your Red Thread, is like the one that's like usually not on my bookshelf because it's usually within pull distance.
I love that.
But I do have this beautiful thank you copy of Find Your Red Thread. And I don't actually have, I don't have any other copies right now because I keep handing them out to people. There it is. Yeah. Yep. The white cover copy. I think people now know me in marketing in my clients for sure, because I am a fan of yours and I hand out your book and your ideas and all of that. So before we dive into all your brilliance, I'm curious, is there a brand or person in your life that you fanned, or maybe the kids call it stand these days, that is actually now become not just like a fandom, but like part of your identity?
Oh, 100%. And probably anyone who knows me well knows what that brand is. But that's Diane Von Furstenberg, which it's a brand. She's a brand. She is the founder of the brand. And it's a clothing brand. And yeah, so way back when, like before I wasn't in any way successful, I always aspired to, what DVF that people call it, like the iconic piece of clothing that she designed, which was what's known as a wrap dress, which is a dress that kind of closes, it's a wrap, like it kind of wraps around you and ties up. And I don't know necessarily like what was so appealing to me, just like I love the colors. I loved what, there's this very famous image of her where she's from, I think, a Newsweek cover where it says like, feel like a woman, wear a dress. And the wrap dress was designed like the same year that I was born. Like I just felt a lot of connections to it, but it was definitely something that was out of reach for me financially for a really long time. And I remember because I lucky enough to have a mother who sewed and taught me how to sew, that, you know, for many of the years before I was in a position to be able to buy DVFs, I would make them because back in the 70s and 80s, she sold the patterns for these dresses, the sewing patterns to these dresses, to a pattern company called Vogue. And and you could find them on eBay. So I would make what I called my TVFs, my Tamsen Von Furstenbergs, which were amazing when I could actually combine a pattern that I found like on eBay with, sometimes I could go to New York and find leftover actual DVF fabric and some of the fabric, and then I would like make my own dresses. But then when oh gosh, it must have been about long time ago now, at least 10 years, let's say, probably 12. I got the first job that paid me enough to afford one. And that was like literally the thing that I did to celebrate getting that job, was that I went to Diane Von Furstenberg store in New York, Mecca, as I like to call it, the mothership, and bought myself my first official Diane Von Furstenberg dress. And it's just, and now it's almost exclusively the brand that I wear on stage. Because they're practical. I love them. I love what they stand for, but it's definitely my go-to brand. It totally is. It's just embedded in how I see the world. It's like nice, clean lines, relentlessly pattern driven, just like me. So yeah, it's DVF, 100%. I love her. I love the business. I love what it stands for. She always does really interesting things from a business model standpoint. Like, she's been kind of at the forefront of business to consumer selling for a high fashion brand. I love the fact that she considers herself to be the low end of the high end dresses. Like, it's, definitely a high end dress, but it's like the lowest price point in a high end dress. I like that too. And yeah, I completely continue to stand her, the brand, all of it. DVF for life.
I love that. Well, if this episode doesn't get the attention of people at the mothership, we will keep knocking on that door, because I would love to be a fly on the wall, as probably many of us would, the day that you meet Miss Diane.
So I have met her, but it was very much in passing. So I had the pleasure of meeting her. I was invited to a dinner where she was speaking. She was the guest speaker, and it was a dinner hosted locally here in Boston by kind of a high-powered woman in the Boston scene, and lucky enough to be invited. So I did have a chance to like meet her in passing. She gave me a thumbs up for the particular DVF dress that I was wearing, because it was not a wrap dress. It was kind of a deep catalog DVF. And I had the pleasure of asking her a question. So I haven't really been able to be like terrify her with the depth of my, she truly is like my own, like my one soul celebrity crush. Like I adore her. But I have been able to meet her once, lucky enough. Yeah, she's great. Love her.
That's amazing. And it just speaks to the power of fandom, which is why I love asking a question about something that somebody loves up front, because it really just unpacks some like those emotional connections and those things that, like, whether we're on stage or, working with clients, like you can't, like, you can mask that in some ways, but when you're really talking about something that you love or you truly believe in, then it creates a change in someone, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, and you talked about that it's become part of my identity. Like part of the reason why I wear wrap dresses, DVF exclusively wrap dresses on stage, is because they are practical. But I also feel really strong in them. And that's like, because to me, they're an outward representation of like of how I see the world from the inside. Like I said, like the ones that I tend to wear they've got these great patterns to them. And like so much of my work is in pattern recognition, about how we recognize patterns in the world and what patterns we base our own behaviors and decision-making on. And they're the ones that I choose to wear, the ones that speak strongly to me are, they're bright colors, they're high contrast. They're just, again, they're an outward representation of the things that I care about, value, that speak me. So to me, like when I wear one, it communicates an extra bit about me and how I see the world, which yes, there's that piece of it. It's like, oh, okay, some certain people are going to recognize that as a DVF dress. That's less of it for me than just like this is like this outward representation of how I see the world. And it just helps me feel very consistent and consonant, like that everything's in line, like everything that I'm doing, everything that I'm saying, everything that I'm showing reflects a consistent set of principles and values.
Okay. I love that. So how do people then with the big ideas that want to be reflective and like holistically in what they do?
Yeah.
Maybe it's an individual who has an idea, whether it's in a book or on stage or that kind of thing, or a brand with a purpose. How do they get that out into the world in a way that people will notice, and not just notice, but pay attention and feel that?
So to me, there's two qualities to that. One is something that's relevant, and the second is that it's remarkable. And a lot of times we put the emphasis on those in reverse, right? There's been such an emphasis on being remarkable and being different and standing out and differentiating that a lot of times people start there. They just try to say, well, how am I different than everybody else? And the challenge with that is that sometimes we spend so much time being different that we don't actually make sure that what we're offering is desired by the audience that we're trying to attract, that it's not even clear that we offer something that's desirable to them. So I think Seth Godin, definitely one of my afar mentor, like from afar mentors, though I've met him as well, and he was kind enough to blurb my book. He's very well known for that concept of a purple cow, like be remarkable enough that people say something about you, which is great, but it presupposes that you want something that a cow could offer, at least if you want to maintain that attention long term. In other words, as I like to say to my clients, like, it doesn't really matter how purple your cow is if your audience doesn't want milk. Like if that's, if they do want milk, well, that's when being a purple cow may come into play, because now you're setting yourself apart from all the other folks, cows, I don't know, that provide the thing that people want. So I think when it comes to getting attention, we tend to look in we for good reason, though, we tend to look in a place that doesn't serve us well. And it's, like I said, it's like, how can we be different? Mm-hmm. And because of how our attention works, how curiosity works, and the fact that ultimately, while different may get attention, relevance keeps it. We have to make sure that you have a combination of kind of both things going in what you put out in the world. But if you had to choose one, choose relevant. Make sure that people understand that you have an answer to a question that they really want answered right now, or that you stand for something that they don't have something to fill in for that at the moment. And then once you've established that, then you can start to work on, okay, now how are we different than the other brands, individuals? How is this idea different than the other ones that also answer that question? So that desired, different, relevant, remarkable, whichever way resonates more with you, but it's that combination that I have found over and over again is what works to create sustained attention and sustained fandom of folks for an idea or a brand.
Yeah. And those who have been listening to Brand to Fan Show have maybe heard me say attention versus affinity.
Yes.
Which is just my translation of exactly what you were just saying, right? Is that you, to me, as someone who learned marketing in work, not in college, when I realized like, marketing does two things. This bucket over here is that remarkable, notice, attention, and this bucket over here is relevance and affinity and keeping them, like helping them fall in love with you.
Yes.
And that has been kind of the thesis, and that's technically the thesis of this whole podcast is that.
Yeah. I mean, and to me, it's the difference between short-term and long-term action and affinity, right? I mean, yeah, you can, manipulate someone's emotions. You can invoke fear. You can kind of dangle something out. You can make it like a hot trend and get people to do it once. But if kind of at the deeper level, it doesn't satisfy something that they need, doesn't deliver on something they care about, if it does, and it doesn't do it in a way that aligns with what they care about, their values, or the way they feel things should happen, then they may buy it once, they may engage once, but they won't continue to engage. Because in order to continue to engage, you have to have that you have to agree in principle. And if people don't agree in principle with not only what you do and why you do it, but why you do it that particular way, then you're never going to get that long-term piece. So if you're interested in long-term, then that's why both pieces of attention and affinity, relevance and remarkable, or remarkable and relevance, different desired, come into play.
Yeah. So can you unpack quickly for us? And I know, you literally wrote the book on this, and I've taken 8-week masterminds with you on the red thread. So to be like, hey, Tamsen, in 2 minutes or less, can you give us the quick and dirty? But I know that you can, because you have a red thread that talks about the red thread. So yes, in a version of that, what are the elements, or what is the core of the red thread that really does make an idea irresistible?
So it's a deeper explanation of what we just talked about, right? So when something, I talk about, let's say, a one-liner or some kind of summation of an idea that has that desired and different included in it, as one of the ways I talk about it, since I work with a lot of startups, is the minimum viable message, like the minimum amount of information that someone needs in order to decide whether or not to continue to pay attention, to continue to go deeper with whatever it is that you're offering. And that's where here's how we give you something that you want via means you don't expect comes into play. What needs to come after that is the rest of the connective tissue, right? And that's what the red thread does. The red thread is the story that you tell yourself about why that answer is the right answer for that question. Another way to think about it is it's more generally, a red thread is the story that we tell ourselves about why things happen or work the way that they do. And we do this anyway. And so the whole philosophy behind the red thread is that since we're already going to build these stories, let's build those stories on behalf of our audience. Let's tell our story in the concepts, language, et cetera, of our audience rather than ourselves. And the book and the approach is really just how to do that. But it's about how do you tie together the principles that underlie why you do what you do together into the most understandable and persuasive articulation that you can deliver to your audience.
Okay. I know I've come to you, and several of our colleagues in the speaking world have come to you. And like you said, you work with startups and other kind of people who have solutions for complex problems or big ideas that they want to put out into the world. Does the red thread work at the beginning of an idea when you're formulating it, or can anyone use red thread to go back and re-examine a message that they think that they've communicated but probably could make stronger?
Both. Absolutely. I mean, see, the thing to understand is that underneath every idea is a story. So one of the things that I say in the book is that every idea has a story because every idea is a story. So when you came up with this podcast, when you came up with, Fan Wagon and all of that, it's because you consciously or unconsciously told yourself a story about why the creation of those things was necessary. So underneath every idea is a story. And so, and underneath every story are the principles it's based on. But let's talk about this relationship between the idea and the story. Because if you already have an idea, but you're struggling with how to communicate it in a way that other people will understand or see why it's as important as you do, or why it's as exciting as you do, then you need to be able to deliver the most important information about that idea in a way that your audience understands it really simply and easily. And story, more on that in a minute, is the best way we have to do that. And I don't just mean once upon a time story or a hero's journey, like there's a character with a problem that meets a guide and all of that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. I mean the elements of the cause and effect relationship that really is what stories are. Like, story is a causal relationship. It's like, this happened because this is true. And so because all that's true, if you don't know what your idea is, you can kind of start to build the story from the beginning. What's the question that we're trying to answer? How do most people look at that? Where do most people look for the answer? Why do we think that's a problem to look there? Where do we think we should look instead? Well, what does that like? Okay, well, now that we're looking at a different place, what do we find? Like, what does that mean? Okay, well, if you put all that together, what does that mean the new answer might be? So that's how you can use the red thread at the beginning when you're like, we've got these people that we want to serve. What's their big question? Okay, let's reconstruct a story that makes sense to us for what we think the right answer to that question might be. If you've already gotten to that point where you're like, I know that I've got, I want to serve this audience that has this question, and I am sure that this is the right answer, then you can go back and make sure the elements of that story are there and in the right order, so that, again, you get the clearest transfer of that idea into your audience's mind in a way that they have what they need to decide whether or not whether or not they agree it's the right answer. So at the beginning, at the end, halfway through, it's anytime you want to strengthen that connection with your or your audience's understanding about why that idea is the right one. That's what the red thread is designed to fill that gap.
Yeah. You actually wrote a great blog post about, I think it was called The Problem with Stories, or of Stories, not long ago. And what I liked about that is because it tapped into something that, I have been guilty of. A story must have central character and it must have, but the way that a business might tell a story, or I might tell the story about the origin of it, might have a little narrative in it, but it's truly about putting that idea in a place where someone, might, like you said, give it to someone in a way that they're thinking about the world, and then kind of show them this other reality and how to move forward with that. So what is a problem with story that marketers or business leaders tend to kind of tie themselves in knots about?
Yeah. I had this conversation with someone yesterday. I think one of the things that they get themselves tied in knots about, but I don't know that people are conscious that this is what's going on, is that they try to tell one kind of story. Storytelling, and a lot of storytelling advice has been dominated by the hero's journey. And hero's journey is best illustrated by Star Wars. I think there's a person on a quest, and there's all sorts of things that happen. And there's rising actions and falling actions. And there's guides and Yodas, and battles of good and evil, and that and the hero's journey is a really strong form of story. It is, and there's a reason why it's called the monomyth, or that it's just almost every culture, if not every culture, has that story form in it. So it's very recognizable to people. And because it is generally about an individual transforming themselves to save the day, and saving the day in the process, like, being the savior of a situation in the process, it's very appealing to our sense of self-importance, frankly. And yet it is not the only story form. And fundamentally, any form of story, whether it's a love story or a hero's journey, or, a rags to riches kind of story, or, any kinds of other story, like, stories they're a vehicle for arguing for ideas. In fact, many storytellers, or people familiar with storytelling, are familiar with the phrase unattributable at this point, because it's so common, that a story is an argument. It's an argument for an idea. And so what happens is that we get so tripped up in the story part of it, we forget the idea part of it. And what can happen when we're on top of that, relying very heavily on one kind of story form, is all of a sudden we're trying to get an idea across that just doesn't fit that story form. Doesn't mean that it doesn't fit story structure if we, use it more broadly and talk about story being a vehicle for ideas. But, for a lot of the clients that I work with, for instance, there isn't a clear villain. Who's the villain of climate change? Who's the villain of poverty? Who's the who's the villain of, the epidemic of unhoused? Like, who's the villain? Can you blame one thing? And not only that, is there a single savior that can save the day? Probably not without wildly overstating what role you, your organization, your idea, even a client could have. And so I think that what has happened is that people, when they've run into that, they're like, oh, well, story doesn't apply. But that's missing the fact that it's not the form of the story that matters. It's the structure of the story that matters, which is what are the elements that are necessary, our brains need, your audience's brain needs just to make sense of something. And that ultimately is what the pieces of the red thread are meant to be. They are the elements that are in every story, whether that's a hero's journey or a rags to riches or a love story or something else. Every story has those elements of, something somebody wants and doesn't yet have, a deeper problem that gets in the way that has to be solved first, a surfacing of some previously silent assumption that makes change necessary, a choice to make a change or not, and then the actions to involve it. Like every story has those elements. And once you can take that down to kind of the principles underneath story, then you can start to see how you can take any idea and take it down into those essential elements of story and still get the message across so that it feels like a story. It has the power of a story. It has the clarity of a story. It has the transferability of a story without necessarily being once upon a time, there was a hero kind of story.
Yeah. And I think my brain, maybe it is the umpteenth children, millions of children's books I've read over the last 9 years, but I feel like I both seek and tune out exactly that kind of hero's journey story. It's too easy to identify and we see it all the time. And so I just really appreciate the thought of what are the core elements of that story, and then how can you package them into any sort of vehicle and put them.
It's much more flexible. And that's what I mean. Business storytelling needs to be more flexible because again, it's like, there's danger in oversimplifying a complex situation. And I know many a company that doesn't even want to oversimplify their solution because they're like, no, it's much more sophisticated than that. And there's danger in oversimplifying like the problem that you try to solve. And there's huge danger in overstating the role that you or a client or a customer can play in that. Yeah. And so it's about really trying to find how can you articulate your idea with integrity, to what it actually does, what's actually possible. So you're setting those expectations that, back to what we were saying before, have to be aligned in order to get that long-term fandom to be in place. And, it's at any of those points of schism, of oversimplification, overstating, of implying that, that your product will 100% save the day, that creates those little cracks in people's willingness to really kind of align with you long term. Like you just can't have those cracks if you want people, like if you want both the hearts and minds of your clients and customers, there just can't be any cracks.
Yeah. If you want both the attention and the affinity, the relevance and the remarkable to come together.
You have to have that both consistency and consonance, and those are two different concepts, but consistency meaning you need to be able to meet people's expectations that you're always going to behave in a certain way, like that if I expect you to behave a certain way, you're going to deliver on that. And then consonance is alignment with values, principles, and that piece. Like I don't want to see, I'm not going to, Patagonia is not going to suddenly create a brand of gas stove right now, for instance.
Yeah, exactly.
Because that would be completely not consonant with what they do. Nor would it be consistent because they don't do stoves. That's not what they do. So that's where you've got to figure those pieces out.
Yeah. I think when some of the work that I do with clients is around audience journey mapping and really identifying, picking out who your key stakeholders are and then taking them one by one and saying, okay, in the very basics of a decision journey, for example, standing in line to order your coffee, right? Or standing in the drive-thru to order your coffee. You might have the go-to order in your head. It's always going to come out the same, but the decision process and how you get to verbalizing that likely looks different based on the environmental factors. Is it sunny today? Is it cold? Is it brutally cold? That's going to change if I'm going to consider my ice drink or my hot drink, right? It's going to change, do I have a lot of time? Is this my third cup of coffee for the day? All of kind of these points in the decision journey that even if I verbalize exactly what I want, and it's exactly the same as the 10 cups of coffee I've ordered before, how I get there changes. And so when we map audience journeys and we take, that kind of decision journey of a very specific audience member with a very specific goal, and then plug in these other factors, put ourselves in the audience's shoes and say, what are they actually doing, thinking, feeling, and then like, what do they need? And that's why I love the red thread, is because your framework really helps unpack and put all of that in. And only then, once we understand kind of what the audience, where they're at, can then the brand put their hat back on and say, okay, now I understand this. How do I reflect in message and even in an emotional response that mirrors the audience? And I think that's kind of speaks to like the consonance piece of that as well, is, can we show up in a way to that person that is accommodating and not in such contrast that it feels awkward? You might go through with, the transaction or the interaction, but it feels
uncomfortable and misaligned, right? Like that's that piece. It's just, so much of, affinity and long-term commitment and all of that is about alignment with expectations and how well that happens. So it's interesting, about probably 5 years ago now, the brand Diane Von Furstenberg brought in an outside designer. I mean, they've had other outside designers, but there was this moment where she being Diane, decided to that it was time to kind of set the next stage of the company. And the idea was to bring in somebody who would, much like, other brands like Chanel and YSL and all those other things, have brought in kind of a name brand designer to oftentimes to take over from the original. Like it's not still like Yves Saint Laurent, he's not around anymore. So replace something else, Coco Chanel, not around anymore. And so you bring in other people. And there's this attempt to do that. And what was really interesting was that it was a very interesting case study in actually missing the deeper values, principles, et cetera, of the brand, because too much changed. Like when that new designer was brought in, it was like, well, this designer is great with prints, and Diane Von Furstenberg is all about prints. And I was like, oh, no, because everything changed. It went from being these beautifully timeless shapes and forms to being really kind of trendy and odd. And the colors were not they were muddied in these other kind of it was just so much changed that it was just this is not okay. And it was nearly fatal to the brand. It was just the staff started, I just remember, because I had a good relationship with them. We had a Boston store, I had a good relationship. The staff just absolutely started leaving in droves. Like the clients were leaving in droves because they no longer sold the things that we expected them to sell. And not because we weren't willing for there to be difference. It was just but if I need a new dress that I know fits in a certain way, part of the reason why that brand is so good is because I can just go in, I know the name of the dress, and I'm just waiting for the site. I want that season's color, or that season's pattern of it. And it just too much changed. And it became not consonant with the deeper principles of what the brand was. And it was a really interesting thing of either, Diane and the brand not really understanding where customers really aligned, or the designer not getting it. But that designer was in place, I think, for less than 2 years. And before it was pulled out, and then they've taken an interesting approach ever since, which is kind of a collaborative design team of a group of people saying what represents, now it's a kind of a multiple perspectives on checks on, is this DVF? Does this reflect what our clients and customers want? And what I find really interesting about that is they're bringing back, not only are they bringing back some classic dress forms that they had gotten rid of, but now they're the really interesting way that they're bringing in new stuff is now there is an actual TVF where it's her granddaughter, who is the T of TVF. Like she's got her own kind of like mini collection within, so that she's doing kind of like building out this, slightly more fluid, more boho kind of thing. And within all of that, but it does ultimately come back down to that alignment with expectations.
Yeah. Wow. I think, when we talk about getting the ideas out and actually crafting the story and doing that part of it well, and kind of what you were just saying, there is risk there in paying lip service to values or something that you've spent years and years and years constructing that might, whether it's a brand shift or a designer shift or like, corporate culture shift, when those actions then don't align with the values that you built a brand on, or you're actually paying lip service to, and it creates that dissonance. How does the brand then, like, other than like zoop pulling back? And I think we're seeing this a lot actually in corporate culture right now. So Southwest Airlines, Disney, there's been some pretty big parts
pullbacks,
pullbacks in that right now. What's the best way to get a team back online, or to get a brand back online? Is it listening to the fans? Is it returning to some of those core things that they've identified?
Yeah, to me, it needs to always be balanced between the two, because a brand needs to know what it wants to stand for, and then but it needs to also understand what its actions and its behaviors are actually standing for. In other words, the way I look at it is kind of like three layers, where there's the brand in terms of, I define brand as the sum total of people's experiences with you, right? So to me, that's the top. Like, and then brands will say, like, the companies will say, we want to have this brand, but in reality, the reality of the brand is simply what people completely think of you. Like, sometimes it's said is like what people think of you when you're not in the room. I forget whose definition of brand it is, but to me, it's the sum total of people's experiences you. So it is, yes, what you say about your brand, but it's also how well does that follow with my interaction, like, the UX on your site, my experience with your products over time, or your services over time, like how it is, what it is to talk with somebody at the front desk, like all of that together is going to help set that brand in my mind. Now, if you think about it, it's the sum total of experiences. Well, that the thing that sits underneath that is behavior, right? It's the behavior that sets the brand. So how you act, what you say, what you do as a brand is what is actually going to contribute to that. So it isn't just marketing. It isn't just all of that. It's like, this is why I've been passionate for all the years I've been in marketing and branding, that, brand is a strategic responsibility of the company. It belongs at the CEO level. It isn't just something that happens after strategy. It's actually part of strategy.
Yeah.
Like, it can't not be part of strategy because it's the behavior that sets the brand. And then underneath the behavior, like, well, why do you behave a certain way? Because, like, one of the issue that you're talking about is when there's a gap, right, between the behavior and the stated brand. And that's when it's like, whoa. You're supposed to be about this, but this is not my experience. So there's a gap there. That's going to be an issue for your fandom and your affinity. But the deeper problem is, like, a lot of times brands even miss it because they don't understand actually what's actually guiding their behavior. They're letting the brand that they want, like, they're saying a thing, they're not actually doing it, but it's because they're missing that the behavior is actually driven by their beliefs and their values. Like their actual beliefs and values, not what they wish there were their beliefs and values, because that's usually reflected in the brand. It's their actual beliefs and values. So when there's conflict with the actual beliefs and values of the company or the brand and the actual beliefs and values of the people they most want and need to serve, that's when you've got a big old problem. So how do you resolve it? And that's, like I said, it's a two-pronged thing. One is you need to go and find out more about what is it about your brand that people actually value. Like, and I think that DVF did that either consciously or not, but it's like, but they went back to this kind of timeless aspect. It wasn't just prints for print's sake. It was actually timeless prints so that I could have I can have a DVF in my closet that I bought 12 years ago, and it should look like, you should not be able to tell that it's 12 years older than, the one that I just bought. Like, you shouldn't be able to tell. Like, that's part of our expectation. Find out what people value about you, and then like have a cold hard look about what is actually driving what your behavior is. So, it's probably an overdone example, but it's a familiar one, so I like to use it. But like United Airlines, for example, Fly the Friendly Skies, that's a brand, right? That's an aspirational brand. That's what they wish you thought. But then a lot of people's experience with the behavior of the brand says, whoop, there's a big old gap there. Because, ask the guy that got dragged off the plane, ask the guy whose guitar got broken, like, how friendly are they? And like, okay, the behavior is different. Now, what's actually driving the behavior of United? Not let's be friendly. Because if let's be friendly was actually a core value, one could argue that those behaviors would never have happened, and we would have been fine. So you can kind of reverse engineer from behavior sometimes and figure out what the beliefs and values are, because I would argue that if you reverse engineer, then United's probably about, two things that are not mutually exclusive. One is shareholder value. That's actually what they care about, is like, how can we deliver maximum shareholder value? And you can see if that's actually driving what you do. Sometimes the thing that's friendly doesn't carry the same outcome that a shareholder would value in the short term. That's a whole conversation about capitalism and quarterly reports. I'm not getting into that. But the other thing is, right, like you could say, okay, well, who does think that United is friendly? Your million milers. Like, the highest end flyers are very happy with United. And anytime anyone's like, what are your problem with United? It's almost always somebody.
Yeah, it's the one who has the status. Yep.
Who has the status, right? But why? Because it still comes down to shareholder value. It's the status ones that actually pay for everything else. It's it's back to shareholder value. So it's kind of one of those things where it's fine as long as there's not that, like, I don't have a problem with, like, if that's actually the value and the belief that's driving. It's just, don't say that it's something else, because it's the minute that you say it's something else is when you start to create all those issues. So it really does come down to saying, okay, what are we actually about? And sometimes that's really an excavation or a reverse engineering process to get to it. Like, all right, we've given these words, but what are our actions actually saying? And then finding the overlap between those values and what your audience values about you, and then finding where that overlap is most valuable, and then operating in that overlap. To me, that's how you fix it. And I don't know what DVF's process was, but they fixed it, so that I am happily back to like regularly buying. And also there's interesting new things, right? Because they're emphasizing now kind of this, that many of their dresses, I should say, many of the wrap dresses are silk. It's one of the reasons why I like them, because they keep me warm when I need to be warm, and they're cool when I need them to be cool, and they don't wrinkle. Like, so again, two practical things, timeless, practical, super stylish, without being like overly trendy. But the sustainability of silk is increasingly a value that is important to a rising group of folks, so that now they have switched, and they are very vocal about, even on their tags, that this is sustainable silk, like this is sustainably sourced silk, or this is silk that comes from a sustainable source. And they're also keying into a lot of the values right now are the kind of anti-fast fashion. Like, it's because it's silk, because it's sustainable, it's going to last you a lot longer. So you're going to get a much better cost per wear. It's going to last longer. I can tell you from personal experience, I have dresses in my closet that that are more than 20 years old, not because I bought them 20 years ago, but because I bought them used, and they're still fine. Right. So like, that's how you start to create that, and can rebuild, is by figuring out what you really want to be about, but also incorporating the values that your audience wants to see in you in a way that's in alignment with who you are and what you care about.
Yeah. And I probably have spent more than my fair share of time with you and other, business strategists and experts in our field, who have imparted this kind of similar wisdom on me. And so I remember trying to talk myself out of fan wagon, because I think to build a good business, you have to also make sure that that's not, like I really did try to talk myself out
like
of
that.
it.
Oh my gosh. You should always try to disconfirm an idea you think is awesome. You should poke holes. Cause yes, cause other people will. So, so fight it. You fight it first.
So, but one of those in that process, okay, well, what does it look like to build a company that I'm passionate about, that does business in the way that I think business could be done, whether that is, culture or sustainability, or like, what are those core values, and writing those down and then being able to translate and to do that. So this has been an incredible reminder that as, the business is launching and we're getting, customers and vendors on both sides of the marketplace, that like, oh, okay, if we say accessible or inclusive, does the functionalities actually do that? Do the things that we control, represent that? And then the things that we influence on either side, does that happen as well? And it was through one of the Red Thread masterminds where I actually worked out the idea, right? Because and before I put my money and my time on the line, I did work it out, that Red Thread for Fan Wagon, and we came up with, which I think is now the most appropriate rule for this episode, is we are what we wear. Is the rule. That's the universal truth, right? And, if you've absolutely demonstrated that for us in this episode as well, going back to the examples of DVF and really just how that connects with your identity. And that's, that's one of the core principles, is like, this is fanware is identity wear. And we put things literally on our body to represent the things that we want to belong to or we believe in.
Yeah. And the thing is, like, your audience will agree with that principle. Like, that's the whole point. Like, so, one of the things that's, come to mind for me lately is really this concept, this principle, that products are principles. They are the physical, like whether it's a program or whether it's a process, like it's a, some other kind of pursuit, it's like whatever. But, in your case, like a product is a principle, or a DVF dress is it's a set of principles. Like, it's a set of principles made real. Like, and you kind of skip over the story stuff in the middle and just say, listen, like, what are the principles that this actually is based on? And when you do that, like, you're surfacing very quickly to basically say, this is what we believe. And because I believe this, I built this thing. It allows someone else to go, oh, I believe that too. Thanks for making it clear. And then, then your job is to deliver on that, is to deliver on the principles that you've put out there. But this whole idea that whether you realize it or not, like, anything you do is representative of the principles that you hold. I mean, to me, that just makes me super fascinated. I'm like, okay, well, what is that? What is the principle that I'm operating on right there when I do that? And, when something, I think when you're particularly passionate about a brand or a product or something like that, it's because there are multiple principles in alignment, right? For you or for whatever. So, I can say, that I've got, principles or values around integrity, consonance. Like, that's really important to me. It just really is. I want you to do what you say and say what you do. And I don't want to see a gap in that. And I'm going to be a greater fan of the people and the brands and the companies that do that than the ones that don't. And anyone knows me well knows that, like, if I were to state one of my key values and principles as a proverb, it would be a stitch in time saves nine. Like, I don't like wasting time on stuff. And it's another reason why, back to DVF, it's useful for me. Cause, like, if I don't have to go to the store and try it on. Like, I can just go, like, that print, I know my size, I'm going to order it, and it's consistent. It will always fit the exact same way, which is part of why, because it saves me time. And it's, and again, practical. Like, something needs to be useful to me. So it's like useful over time. So again, there's things that I care about, back to you saying, like, we are what we wear, 100%, because what you choose to wear, whether that is you don't care or you care very much, is reflective of the principles that you hold about that particular aspect of how you show up in the world. And I frankly don't care what your choices are. Like not everybody is like weirdly obsessive as me as I am about DVF. And that's fine because you've got different principles and that's okay. But knowing what they are is a source of incredible power when it comes to really getting audiences invested in what you are, what you do, what you stand for. Because it's that investment, like that monetary and emotional investment in you, your brand, or your products, what you stand for, that is at the heart of long-term affinity, that it's the heart of fandom. So to me, like that's the thing that whether you're the founder or whether you're in the marketing department or salesperson, like you, like the more that you can figure out about that, how do you get people invested and what can you do to really deliver on that investment? That to me is priority number one.
I love it. There is a reason, Tamsen, that you are the idea whisperer. Usually I try to succinctly kind of package the whole episode into a little ditty, and there's no way I can do it better than you.
Products or principles.
So I'll have to work on my red thread for this episode and we'll put it in the show notes. Before I let you go, because I do want to be respectful of your stitch in time, we do ask 2 questions on the Brand a Fan show. The first one, I think you've answered all along, which is what are you a fan of right now? Is there anything else or any other brands experiences that you also are a fan of?
Yeah. I mean, I for whatever reason, a lot of them are clothing brands, but like I'm enjoying seeing, I've always been a fan of DVF. I'm really enjoying seeing how the brand Eileen Fisher does what it does and how clearly they represent and live the principles that they're about, from circular design to sustainability to, consumer stuff. It's just very interesting, how they do it. Cause they clearly have some principles that are very similar to DVF, but it's different. Obviously they don't have prints. I've never seen a print on an Eileen Fisher thing. But it's just really, so I'm always fascinated by those companies that I think that are living their values that way. So, I'm very intrigued by Eileen Fisher and DVF. Always
of course.
Ride or die for DVF.
I love it. I'm still working towards my very first, but I have hearted several of them on Poshmark. So maybe one of
that's
these
the thing. Stalk the sales, man. Like the sales, like you can absolutely. And if you wait long enough, like you can get you just have to stalk the sales. I rarely buy one full price. Sometimes I will, just because I don't want to miss that one.
When you do.
Oh my gosh, it sure does. But I the vast majority of ones that I buy, either buy secondhand or I buy because I was able to just combine rewards points or a Honey or Capital One shopping coupon or whatever. And just, and then particularly layer up on sales. So sales. Cause again, I appreciate the value, but I'm not going to spend more than I need to ever.
Fair.
Again,
Super
another
fair.
principle of another value of mine.
Super fair. So the other question is, other than the beautiful clothing that you wear, what is your favorite piece of fan wear in your own closet?
There it is.
Ooh, it's a Red Sox hat.
My so well worn Red Sox hat that it's splitting here, and I don't know what I'm gonna do when I may just continue to wear it. But part of why I love it, I don't know, I love that hat because it's lived in. But there's also a very practical reason why I love this hat is that I have a tiny head. My husband says I have a tiny bird skull. And many hats this distance, from bottom hem to top is actually long enough that it starts to push my ears down. So, but this is a shallower hat. And so the fact that it's a shallower hat means it's not only my beloved Red Sox, but it's also a much more comfortable hat because it actually fits my tiny bird skull.
I believe that Ron Tite in a couple episodes ago, who also very particular about hats, mentioned that is a mid crown. I think that is the same as a mid crown fit where it doesn't kind of hit your ears. So I'm going to make that a fit option on FanWagon. So as people are uploading their hats, we can make sure that we can tag your profile appropriately and help you replace potentially your beloved Red Sox hat when it becomes too worn for wear.
I can't just go someplace and buy it. I have to try on a hat because it's there'll be hats that I love and then I put them on. I'm because between my glasses and my tiny bird skull, like I said, like they may not even, I don't even know if this is mid crown. It might be short crown. Like I have but it's like, that drives me nuts because again, efficiency standpoint, I don't actually love going out and shopping. I don't love having to find something. So if I can just like click and order, I love that. So please add like a
hat fit,
like
someone,
depth of hat.
All right, I'll be calling Wade's. I'm gonna get all their specs, and then we'll add it to Fan Wagon. Well,
But yes,
Tamsen,
that's my favorite. Is my very old at this way. It has to be. I think it's probably at least 15 to 18 years old. This hat, so I love it.
I love it. And when it's done with you, then you can put it on Walnut, your Greyhound, and take some pictures, and then you'll have those.
Oh my gosh, his head is even smaller than mine, though. Like you would think, like yeah. If I got a tiny bird skull, then I don't even know what he's got. It's like much smaller.
Tamsen, how can our audience keep up with you and follow your own work?
Best way is actually my newsletter. So tamsenwebster.com/newsletter is the way to kind of get early access to deeper thinking and kind of, it's where I preview ideas for my books, but day to day LinkedIn is my jam. It's kind of where I'm pointing everybody. So even though I maintain a handle holding presence on the other platforms, the only place I'm really ever active these days is on LinkedIn.
Well, if you are now also a fan of Tamsen Webster and you identify or align with her thinking that story is the argument for ideas, and the caution there being when building those stories, the idea can sometimes get lost in the form. So using the red thread allows you to unpack the crucial elements of the story so that your audience is tied into that irresistible idea, because that adds to that experience that they have with you, which adds to your brand and the value and the loyalty and the affinity, so that your brand can be both relevant and remarkable for years to come.
Oh,
I'm gonna have to work on it.
Wrapping it all up.
I have to work on it, but I will start to structure these with goal, problem, truth, action, change, and or change, action, and do that for future episodes of the Brand Fan Show. But we're going to put lots of links to the things that Tamsen mentioned, including maybe if you'll share with me after the show your favorite DVF dress names, so we can maybe link to
oh sure, yes,
as well. We're going to put all of that in the show notes for this episode, and of course every episode on brandtofan.show. And if you like this episode, don't forget to share it with someone else. Subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get this show. This is the Brand of Fan Show. It's the podcast that unpacks the phenomenon of fandom to help you build for the future by creating more fans. And I am a huge fan of our guest, Tamsen Webster, and I'm proud to call you a friend. Thanks for being here.
Well, I'm a fan of you, Ms. Lauren Teague. So thanks for having me on.